Don't pick Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen in round one of your Dynasty leagues. We'll explain why on this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. And it's a Wednesday show, so of course that means Matt Williamson is here. Follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. Go check out his new YouTube channel as well. We've got some really good mailbag questions for you guys today, so let's just get right into it. The first question here comes from Derek. He wants to know, can I justify drafting a quarterback in round one of my startup draft when you only can start one QB? I know this is a very common thing for a lot of new Dynasty players. Matt, what is your thought?
Wow, this is a throwback question. I mean, I've been doing this a long time, and Ryan McDowell and I used to talk about this all the time with Andrew Luck. We'd get this question over and over and over. And back then, you know, Dynasty wasn't as well known. A lot of people were getting into it for the first time, and they love Dynasty because it's a little more like building a real team. And people would value quarterbacks more, saying, hey, I could just start Andrew Luck for the next decade or 15 years, start him 16 times a year. Isn't that worth my first overall startup pick? And even then, Ryan and I would say vehemently, no. I mean, there's just too many of them. There's still supply and demand. That is a wonderful safety blanket. I'm sure it's a nice feeling. And Luck might not be the perfect example, but this is the guy we was talked about so much because he was the super prospect. He was the Caleb Williams of his day. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned that because he retired early. You know, it's not like, aha, I told you so. Because he got a lot of good years out of Andrew Luck. And I'm sure that was a wonderful feeling for majority of his career. And you could ignore it in all your rookie drafts. And that sounds great. But then you passed on a stud receiver or a running back or whatever. I mean, I just think that there are too many of them to go around. I would consider it, I don't know what round. I don't have, startup ADP in front of me, but I probably would never be one of the first 5 owners to take a quarterback in a startup. One quarterback, of course.
My rule of thumb here when I'm in a startup draft, and like this kind of goes for everybody, I draft pretty much anything but a quarterback until there's a point in the draft where I hit the dead zone of players that I'm not a big fan of. And that's where I start to look at other positions like a quarterback, like a tight end. And usually that happens somewhere around like the 5th or so round. I don't think you can justify, even as Matt said, it's very nice. Like, let's say you draft Patrick Mahomes. It's going to be really nice to have that kind of no question mark starter. But I don't think you can justify the cost here when you look at the variability, like between some of these quarterbacks. The variability is much less significant, but among maybe the top 5 quarterbacks and, QBs 6 through 12 than it is when we get into the wide receivers. Like if you're drafting a top 12 wide receiver versus, a wide receiver 2, for instance, the scoring differential on any given week might be a lot more significant for the wide receivers, for the running backs in those tier breaks, as opposed to a quarterback where, like, yeah, you might have the luxury of not having to really think about the quarterback position, but the difference between a Josh Allen and a Dak Prescott is, somewhere around like 3 points per game, right? Like when you actually look at the math, it feels.
Yes, I get it. Again, I've got a lot of family members who are new-ish to Dynasty, and they're looking at somebody like Josh Allen, who's 27, who has scored 40 or more touchdowns now in 4 straight seasons and gives you the rushing upside. Is there any justification, Matt, if you are in like a 6-point per passing touchdown league where it's, hey, these guys are just going to score so many points. It's nice to just get that guy that's already proven, not like Andrew Luck, who, I mean, obviously we thought Andrew Luck was going to be a really good quarterback, and he was. But, I mean, Josh Allen is the second best quarterback in the league right now, in the prime of his career. Can you justify it at all in a 6-point per passing touchdown league?
I still don't think so, because you can always find quarterbacks, like small example. In one of my leagues I'm looking at, I was just the rookie draft coming up, and I'm like, boy, I really have nothing at quarterback all of a sudden. I was counting on Justin Fields, and now he's a backup. Okay. So I make an offer for a future third for Baker Mayfield just to have somebody. Immediately they accept it, because they had 4 quarterbacks on their roster, and I can live with Baker Mayfield and it cost me a future third. I can't do that for a number 2 receiver. I can't do that just for a placeholder starter, even at tight end. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like in the real world where you draft tackles high, because I do not want to be free agent shopping for an offensive tackle because I'm going to spend tier 2 money for a tier 3 player. At quarterback, it's the opposite. I can buy good ones for 90 cents on the dollar every year, any time of the year.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's very fair. And again, looking at just the difference in performance, like in terms of, if you're going to pay sort of a third round pick, right, for a quarterback, yeah, is it ideal to start Baker Mayfield in any given week? No, but like the production, I think you're expecting some consistency there. I do think the point that you're going to have to pay up more for a wide receiver or running back in a lower tier, like the cost is going to feel that much more significant, especially in a single quarterback league. And I'm going to give you an example, like especially last year, we saw more quarterback injuries than ever. We saw more backup quarterbacks than I think any of us could have perceived. Joe Flacco took me to my championship game because, and this was in a league where I had really no answer at quarterback. Kirk Cousins was my starter. And after I lost Kirk Cousins, I was just kind of like filling in the pieces. But you know what? I was able to do that because there is a plethora of quarterbacks available on the market. And then I pick up Joe Flacco, who literally carried me to my championship. Like, they're easier to come across than these mid-range wide receivers and running backs in a single quarterback league.
Yeah. All right, let's get to some more questions. And this next one is a really good one from Hunter about competitive balance in your dynasty leagues and how do you solve it? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and in the NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And now with the NFL schedule getting released tonight on 8 p.m. on Wednesday, you could actually go check out all of the NFL lines. We're going to have all the week 1 lines up on FanDuel. We already have several of them up right now, so go check out those as well. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Are you having to turn down the volume because of all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all that screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, this next question comes from Hunter. He wants to know, what do you recommend to a league where 1 or 2 teams have all the best players and competitive balance is down and people are wanting to disband the league? Is it on the 2 teams to change, or do you think there are people out there who would take on a rebuilding project? What should this league do?
I have a feeling this is going to be a long conversation. I think there's a lot of angles to attack it. deep down, my thought is grin and bear it. You built you dug your grave and now you got to sleep in it. You went where all the veterans in the startup draft, you traded all your picks and now your teams are horrible. Or, hey, I built myself a dynasty. I deserve to take your money year after year. And if you're smart, you should be able to at least rebuild and get competitive in 2 years. I mean, with the way that these things are structured.
Really quick, Matt. Really quick.
Go, please.
We highly recommend, if you are trading future draft picks, like as soon as you trade your future first round pick, you should have to pay your league dues for the following year right then. I think that's a really good thing to help people from trading other picks and then just getting out of the league.
100%. So I'm going to flip it. Like let's say there's 10 competitive teams and 2 of those absolute garbage teams. Should they say, hey, let's start over? Like, this isn't fun for me anymore. But even though I won in year 1, like, no, you grin and bear it. You're a bad owner. Such is life. Either pay your dues and get out or whatever. I mean, and no one's telling Brady's Patriots, hey, why don't we take Gronk off your team to make things a little more competitive? Or, hey, Andy Reid, let's say Chris Jones from you guys, because you guys are too good and we feel bad. Give them to the Panthers. Like tough crap. Live with it. I know there's scenarios where we could, at least make it, understandable. But overall, you built your bed. You're a bad owner. Live with it. Or I'm a great owner and I'm dominating the league. Give me your money.
Kate, what are your thoughts?
I'm really on the same exact page with Matt. Now, that's not probably the most actionable advice. I do think that it's one of those situations. I think, in order to sort of prevent that mass exodus once a team realizes, oh crap, I did a really poor job of constructing this dynasty roster. I do think, Marcus, that your point of getting buy-ins for future picks. So if you're going to trade a 2025 first round pick, you are owing for 2025. If you want to, if your league allows it and you want to trade into 2026, great, pay up, because that is going to help, ensure that you're not just trading away all assets, dipping and leaving the shambles to deal with it. Now, I do think that there may be some more actionable ways to have this discussion outside of I don't know, be better. Some, I think maybe the actionable piece of advice here is to look at why is there a lack of competition between these teams. Are these 2 managers at the top very active in trades as opposed to others at the bottom of the barrel who, maybe aren't as active in the trade market, aren't scouring waivers? Is it one of these instances where, I don't know, second half of the season, you have a group that's less engaged and they know they're not going to be competitive rest of season. So they just tank, and that helps fuel the fire more depending on schedule and matchups. I think looking at what is the reason here for that tilt and finding rules and proposing rules that, encourage more, engagement. What if you proposed a rule, maybe you see those 2 top managers are always trading and the ones at the bottom of the league aren't. What if you proposed a rule that everybody has to execute a minimum of 5 trades per season? I'm just a very, an off the wall suggestion, but if you realize that there's a lack of engagement in the second half of the season, put incentives into your league to, continue to get the buy-in of managers. Okay, maybe you're tanking for next season, but I don't know, if the high score of the week gets, an extra $10 from the pool, yeah, you might have some people that are more engaged in setting lineups, participating in waivers after it feels like things are kind of over.
I would also say just wait things out. Things change really fast in the NFL. I mean, perfect example. Let's look at May ADP from 2022. So 2 years ago, right? I'm just going to read you the first round names: Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Najee Harris, Kyle Pitts, Cooper Kupp, DeAndre Swift, Javonte Williams, Deebo Samuel, T. Higgins. Like, look how fast things changed in 2 years when it comes to your dynasty ADP. So just because they have all the best players now doesn't mean they're going to be the best players for the next 3 or 4 years as well. So like, just hang tight, right?
Take a breather.
Yeah. And the other thing, if you're really worried about the commitment of the other players in your league, maybe that's a sign in the first place that don't play with those members. But there's also other things that you can put in place, right? You can have it be an empire league, like Matt and I were talking before the show, where as soon as somebody wins the league 2 years in a row, you start the league over, and maybe whoever does that gets a bigger pot of the kitty, right? Or maybe you make it a salary cap league and you can only have players on your team for 3 years before they hit free agency. There's plenty of creative ways to make sure that competitive balance stays there. But I think for the most part, I just agree with you guys. Like, figure it out. Get competitive. Find a way to beat the teams that are at the top. That's even more rewarding. If your team is really bad and you're able to build it back up to beat them, that's fantastic. That's what this thing is all about.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, the competitive rebuild is as much fun as winning it all. Sometimes, it's building from the bottom up. I mean, I took over an orphan team many moons ago, and they were junk. And I remember my first 2 rookie first round picks, I think, were Zeke Elliott and Todd Gurley. And the year after that, I was 16-0 and I dominated the league. I just happened to make all the right moves. It happens
fast.
Like, it can happen fast. You live through what we used to call the productive struggle for 2 years, and you make some smart moves and trade your old guys. That stuff's fun. I mean, I think that's why you get in it, to be honest with you. And the other suggestion is, let's say we're all in the Locked On Dynasty League, and you guys are dominating. It's no fun for the rest of us. Well, let's do Locked On Dynasty 2. Start a whole new league and with the exact same owners, and we'll repick it and go from there. Or there's definitely leagues that get broken that just everyone needs to walk away. That's different though.
Yes.
Some leagues just, no one's into it anymore. Okay, we're done,
Kate, any final thoughts here before we move on?
No, I think there are a lot of different ways to approach it, but I think generally speaking, there's going to be nothing more rewarding than a successful rebuild. And I do think that a lot of the times when you're in this situation where you just can't find your way to the top, I'm going to be honest, a lot of the times it's because I think I'm more competitive than I am, and I need to tear it down and rebuild. And I think having that honest discussion with yourself is kind of one of these key components. If you think you're almost in it every year, but there are these juggernauts at the top that you can't, maybe it is time to rebuild and have that sort of come to Jesus moment where you're looking at your roster and being realistic for the expectations. And that might be the key to resetting it all for you.
We might have to do a show on this, like in the doldrums of July or something. But when to your point, Kate, it just made me think of this. Like when you're looking at your team this time of year and rookie drafts are around the corner and it's like, okay, am I competitive this year? Am I pushing or am I rebuilding? I bet a good rule of thumb is say rebuild. When in doubt, rebuild. You're not as good as you think.
I think that's very, very good advice.
That's so fair.
Yeah, we're going to be doing more on this topic throughout the summer because I mean, we love talking about players and teams and fantasy values and all this stuff, but it's also good to talk some strategy. So we will continue that all summer long, but let's talk about a certain player that I think a lot of people are interested to see in year 3, and that's Garrett Wilson. We will get to him next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. I love using Gametime for NFL tickets. Thinking about going to that Browns-Cowboys home opener in Cleveland. We'll see about when the Cowboys and Steelers play when that gets announced later today. It's going to be so much fun. Go use Gametime. You can save up to 60% off buying last minutes for sports, concert, comedy, and theater events near you. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or the event. Save even more when you choose a section and let Gametime choose the seats. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Our last question here comes from at XCatcher. He wants to know, what are the expectations for Garrett Wilson this year? Is this the year that we finally get elite production?
Yes. I thought last year's production without Aaron Rodgers was impressive, considering the circumstances. All the coverage rolled his direction. Just watching the tape of it all, I think he's a tremendous player. He's one of the few guys out there that I don't really care that much about situation. You know, if Rodgers retires after the year, it's a whole new coaching staff. I don't care. I still want him. I mean, I think that transcendence a big word, but I think he's a productive player, a wide receiver one, no matter what. And potentially the wide receiver one. There aren't many guys out there that I say could be the wide receiver one, but he's one of them.
I mean, if Aaron Rodgers plays 15
right.
games, I mean, how many targets are we looking at for Garrett Wilson? 160? I mean, could he average 10 targets a game? I think so. Okay.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. 69th percentile over the last 2 seasons in terms of yards per route run. And you know what I think is all the more impressive? He ranks in the 12th percentile for catchable targets over the course of his career. 12th percentile for catchable targets. That is #not good. If they can get him a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers, or even in the post Aaron Rodgers era, that can deliver a somewhat accurate NFL throw, he is a perennial wide receiver one without question. I think the ceiling is too dang high, especially when you're considering that this is a guy who has posted back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in what? Like, in a scheme that I think is we've heard conjecture probably over the last week or so all about how the Jets did just about anything to try to figure out an answer at offensive coordinator with concerns with Nathaniel Hackett and what he's doing for this offense. It didn't matter to Garrett Wilson. It didn't matter to Garrett Wilson that he was catching passes from a Zach Wilson. None of it mattered, right? He was still productive. And if 1,000 yards is the floor for Garrett Wilson, my God, what is the ceiling? Like, too talented a player, I think, to pass up on. And we never really saw the price dip for Garrett Wilson. He's just kind of mingled right around, wide receiver 4 to wide receiver 6. And I still think it's a perfect spot to buy.
So, Matt, I got to ask you a real life dynasty question, because Kate and I are in a league. We're drafting right now.
For a friend?
Yes. In the second round of this super flex league, I had a choice between Puka Nacua and Garrett Wilson. Who would you have drafted in the second round between those two receivers?
Wilson. And I've come around a lot on Nacua, and I was hesitant to give him the credit he deserves and just thought he was a Sean McVay creation. He was Frankenstein's monster, that a lot of guys could do it. And I still believe that compared to Garrett Wilson. Like if we flipped scenarios last year, they wouldn't have been close. You know what I mean?
Wilson is certainly more talented, I think.
Right.
There's no doubt.
But you don't care about that from the picking perspective. You just
No.
want fantasy points. I mean, and I don't think McVay's going anywhere. Cup might be. Stafford might be, though, too, and that scares me. I would take Wilson. Not a slam dunk, though. I mean, if you asked me this late in the regular season, I would have said, I'm not there yet on Nacua. But the more I watched him this offseason, too, the better football player I thought he was than I originally did.
Kate, what are your thoughts? Because right now in Dynasty League football, we have Puka Nacua going 10th overall and Garrett Wilson going 11th. So they're right next to each other. Which way do you lean?
I'm going to go with Garrett Wilson here. And again, this kind of just comes from the comparison of ceiling and floor, right? Their ceiling, we might, if we're going to say maybe Puka Nacua's 2023 is Garrett Wilson's ceiling, that's fine. But I think Garrett Wilson's floor feels a bit higher to me, just from a pure talent perspective. Both are kind of in similar situations, right? Like, how long is Matthew Stafford going to be there? They are going to be their team's top dogs. Like, Garrett Wilson, less target competition at this point, but I'm just going to give Wilson the edge because, again, back-to-back seasons with 1,000+ receiving yards. And I think this is about as low as it can get for Garrett Wilson, barring an injury.
Something I've done over my whole dynasty lifespan is when I have situations like this, and I think it stems from my career and being in the league and et cetera, that I almost anytime I have a tie-breaking situation, I just take the better football player. If I'm not sure, because the league changes so fast. Wilson's going to be good 2 years from now. Is Nakua? Probably, but when in doubt, just give me the better football player.
Which I for the most part, I agree with. I took Puka in this league, by the way. So I went against both of you. To me, it's the McVay factor, and they're going to be playing how many games every year in nice weather. And that does worry me a little bit when we get to late December and January, when we get into the fantasy football playoffs. Garrett Wilson is going to be playing in some crappy, bad weather games, and Puka is going to be playing in domes. And it's just that little tiebreaker is the only part for me that made me take Puka. And I know that's probably bad reasoning, but it's why I decided to go with Puka. I think both of those guys are fantastic picks. You can get him in the mid part of your second round in some super flex dynasty leagues. Outstanding values. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen of the day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Go follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. Go check out his new YouTube channel as well, Williamson NFL over there. Go follow Kate at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.